Hello, everybody, and welcome once again to Nutrition 101. I hope everybody's gearing up for the holiday and is staying safe. I'm delivering a lecture this week to keep us on track with the course and also to help introduce the diet project, which is the final project for this course. Today we're going to be talking about energy balance, which is the last set of concepts that you really need to do the diet project. Energy balance refers to balancing the energy that your body requires to operate with the amount of food that you are consuming. So it's, I guess, fairly relevant going into the holidays. And in general, we consider the energy that you need to be a combination of three factors. The major one is what we refer to as your basal metabolism, which is the amount of energy that you need to just exist. Then there's the energy that's required to do physical activities, and also there's a small amount of energy that is required to digest your food. And there can be a number of situations that you find yourself in. The first one, energy deficit, is when you consume fewer calories than you expend, and this will cause you to lose weight and can become hard on your body if you are already a healthy weight or if you're underweight. If you continue to lose weight, this can disrupt your metabolism and also your bodily functions. In general, your body will act to reduce the amount of weight you lose during long periods of energy deficit. Energy balance, of course, refers to the situation where you are consuming only your energy needs and nothing more. And then energy excess is when you consume more calories than you expend, which leads to weight gain and ultimately obesity. And it's not quite as simple as just balancing the calories you burn with the calories you eat. There are other factors that go into exactly how fast your metabolism is. So the major calorie requirement in your body is due to what we call the basal metabolic rate. And this is the energy that's expended to maintain your resting functions, such as respiration, circulation, maintenance of body temperature, the synthesis of new cells, secretion of hormones, and nervous system activity. And the major determinant of your BMR is your lean body mass, which varies widely among people. So in general, body fat doesn't require energy to maintain. It is a place where we store nutrients to use for energy later. The tissues that use energy are generally muscle. There are a number of factors that affect the BMR. The main one is age, but also body size and composition. Interestingly enough, body surface area makes a difference because you lose more heat from a larger surface area on your body. The temperature that you live in, the air temperature, affects it because if it's colder out, then you need more energy to stay warm. Also, it can be affected by hormones. People with fevers generally have a faster metabolism because their body temperature is higher, so all of the reactions in their body occur quicker. And if you are fasting, your metabolism generally seeks to become more efficient and will burn fewer calories and therefore burn less fat in order to save energy. Now here is a comparison so you get the idea of what lean body mass means. These images show two different individuals. The first one in panel A shows two people that have roughly the same lean body mass. The first one has 50% body fat and 125% lean body mass, or 125 pounds of lean body mass, and their total weight is 250 pounds here. And then the person that has 18% body fat still has a 123 pound lean body mass, but a total weight of 150. Now you can look at this a different way. If you have two people that weigh the same, 150 pounds, the person with 10% body fat will have 135 pounds of lean body mass, and the person with 20% body fat will have 120 pounds of lean body mass. So these people are technically the same weight, but the first person is in significantly better physical condition and has about the correct amount of body fat, whereas the person on the right has a slightly more than the recommended amount. You can measure your body fat percentage or your body composition a number of ways. Things that you may have heard of are something called a fat fold measure, where they take a caliper and they pinch a section of your skin to gauge the thickness, and this is related to the percentage of body fat on your body within 5 to 10%. The most accurate way of measuring body fat percentage is doing something called hydrodensitometry, where they immerse you in water and weigh you in water and then weigh you again in air, and they can determine based on the known densities of bone, muscle, and fat what your body percentage is within a few percent. And then there's another one called bioelectrical impedance, where they hook electrical electrodes up to your body in various places where there's fat, and they try to conduct an electrical current and measure the resistance, and this can also estimate body fat percentage, but it's a little bit less accurate than hydrodensitometry, although significantly more convenient. Now, the most commonly encountered measure of what we would call body composition, or rather the healthiness of your weight, is with something called body mass index, or BMI. This is simply calculated as your weight in pounds divided by your height in inches squared times 700. And this is a rough indication of your health status. It's not incredibly accurate because it doesn't consider body composition. However, it is a fairly good estimate for a large number of people. In general, if you have a very high BMI, then you are overweight, and if you have a very low BMI, you're underweight, and should take steps to mitigate that. Here is a table of body mass indexes. So you don't even have to calculate it. You can just find yourself on this list, on this table. So if you are 5'10" and 150 pounds, you can scroll over here to the place where 150 pounds is, and you are in the green with a BMI between 18.5 and 25. Now, if you are 5'10" and 200 pounds, you're just on the edge of being obese, according to the BMI. However, people that are incredibly athletic or muscular or have very large builds may find that they are always in the red, even when they are very physically fit. So you also have to take these kinds of things with a grain of salt. In general, we consider a healthful body weight to be a BMI between 18.5 and 25. And if you have less than 18.5, it probably means that you're underweight and you should eat more to build more body fat. People who are overweight generally have a BMI above 25. Sorry, this is a typo. This means that you have a bit of excess body fat, but most people are still capable of living healthy lives within this range. However, if you are above about 30, that was considered obese and unhealthy. Now, if you need to lose weight, then the best way to do that is to increase your metabolism by exercising. This will increase the percentage of muscle in your body, which will increase the amount of energy that you burn at rest, because muscle is more active than fat. Another important thing to do to increase your metabolism is to hydrate, because all of your metabolic processes occur in water, and if you don't have enough water, then they will not happen as quickly, which leads us to the idea of people who try to lose water weight when they're dieting. This is absolutely the worst possible thing that you could do. because if you lose water weight, then your metabolic function decreases, as well as putting you in danger of a number of other conditions. Another way to increase your metabolism is to eat breakfast. If you skip breakfast, then your body stays in a hibernative state and will use less energy overall, which will result in you burning less fat overall. This is a state called ketosis, and despite the popularity of the keto diet these days, that is bad for you, and there is no universe in which it's good for you. If you live in a cold climate, or if you just decide to not wear a jacket on a cool day, then it will cause your body to work harder to maintain your body temperature, which will in general use more energy, and this will assist you in increasing your metabolism as well. Other things you can do: eating bits of carbohydrates all day, such as fruits and vegetables. This will jumpstart your metabolism and lead you to burn more fat overall. If you're exercising, you can do things like walking on uneven ground or on inclines. Also, there's a thing called circuit training, where you do a group of exercises and then you cycle back and do the first one again and then do the group of exercises again. This changes up the muscles that you're using and gives your muscles that are tired a chance to rest and build back up their ATP stores, which allows you to then use them again at almost full capacity. If you sit a lot, you should make a serious attempt to move after 1 hour of sitting, because after this amount of time, your body starts to go back into hibernation. But all you really need to do is about 10 minutes every hour. Another thing that you can do is to decrease your calorie intake by 1,000 calories a week. And this is if you want to be healthy. If you want to be physically fit, you should decrease your calories by 2,000 a week. And that might sound like a lot, but it really ends up to be maybe just a little more than 200 or 300 calories a day. Now, if you live, there are a number of ways that you can live in terms of physical activity. Most people in our culture live sedentary lifestyles, which includes mostly sitting, driving, or low levels of activity. Lightly active people still do a lot of sitting, but they may also walk around and do some light lifting throughout the day. A moderately active person intentionally exercises up to an hour every day or 4 to 5 days a week. You might have a job that you do physical labor during, but it's not intense physical labor. And very active people do a lot of physical activity. We're talking more than an hour a day of physical activity. And this requires a significantly larger amount of energy. You can estimate how many calories you need to consume with a handy formula that is I found on the Canadian government health website. And you can find it in other places. I don't know if it's actually in your textbook, but it's here. For women, you use this formula, which seems a little bit complicated, but I'll go through it. You start with 354, and which is, it may seem like an arbitrary number, but then you subtract 6.91 times your age, and then you add your physical activity level times this expression that includes your weight and your height. So physical activity strongly comes into the equation, and you can use these factors that I've given here to indicate what your physical activity level is. Notice if you're sedentary, it's 1, so this is just 9.36 times your weight plus 726 times your height in meters. And this will, for a 21-year-old woman who weighs 160 pounds and is 5 foot 8 inches tall, gives a number of 2,375 calories if they are lightly active. which, as I said before, is somebody who spends a lot of time sitting, but also spends a somewhat significant amount of time moving around and doing light lifting activities throughout the day. Now, this number might seem high based on what people often say about calorie needs, but this is probably a more accurate number than anything under 2,000. A 2,000 calorie diet is for a fairly small person who doesn't do a lot of physical activity. 2,500 calories is a fairly small adult man who doesn't do a lot of physical activity and isn't particularly overweight. Your calorie needs go up rapidly as you do more physical activity and as you get larger, because it requires more energy to move you around. Now, one of the things about weight regulation is that our bodies are sort of designed to maintain a weight without gaining or losing. And this is due to hormonal regulation by fat cells themselves. So most people stay in the same weight range their whole life until something such as a pregnancy or an illness or a surgery or a depressive episode leads them to either lose or gain a bunch of weight, and then they stay at that weight for a long time. We also know that your base metabolism decreases with age, so you have to either decrease your calorie intake or increase your activity, or both, as you get older. Now, there's hormones that are involved in this process. Leptin, resistin, and adiponectin, they're all released by fat cells. Leptin is responsible for suppressing your appetite. Resistin increases insulin resistance, and adiponectin acts against resistance. So there's obviously going to be a balance of these in your blood. As you lose fat, it typically releases adiponectin to cause your cells to respond to insulin more so that you can get energy. And I've showed you this before in the fat lecture, but the way that fat cells are formed is that they have a large spherical shell that is the cytoplasm and cell membrane and the cell nucleus. And the triglycerides in your blood get transported in and reconstructed into a big fat globule that swells up to a certain limit and then splits into two fat cells. And that's shown here. As you gain weight, you make more fat cells. The fat cells get larger. The fat cells divide. And then if you lose weight again, the larger number of fat cells remains, but the amount of fat in them depletes. This makes it very easy to gain weight back after dieting because you have not decreased the amount of fat cells that you have. You've decreased the amount of fat in those cells. And because each of the cells exudes hormones that predispose you to fill them back up again, it might cause you to experience extreme hunger and overeat, which will be immediately stored as fat. Now, there are two types of body fat. There's the subcutaneous fat that's found directly under your skin that cushions your body and your muscles. Then there is the abdominal muscle layer, and then something called the visceral fat, which is fat that lives inside your body cavity and insulates your organs and cushions them. Now, there are two main fat distribution patterns that you see in people. The apple-shaped fat patterning is when you have fat around your midsection and upper body. This is the fat that increases your risk for chronic diseases. And it's typically found in men because they tend to store fat in the abdominal region. Now, pear-shaped fat patterning is when the fat is on your lower body, such as your butt or your thighs. It is not associated with a significant increase in chronic disease risk. And this is where women tend to store fat. And in general, women will be higher in body fat percentage than men will be, simply because their muscles tend to be less metabolically active. And here's a picture. The apple-shaped fat patterning is the classic beer belly or flat tire shape. And then the pear shape is fat around the hips and thighs. This fat is not against your internal organs and is therefore significantly less unhealthy. Now, there's a couple situations that you might find yourself in when it comes to energy balance. If you are overeating or feasting, then in general, carbohydrates will be broken up into glucose and then either end up in the liver or muscle as glycogen, which, if you remember, is the carbohydrate that is responsible for sugar storage in your body. There is very little space for these molecules, and so once they are filled up, all of the carbohydrates you consume will become body fat. Fat that if you overeat fat, or rather eat calories in excess that are mostly fat, all of that will be body fat. There is no other place that it can go. As well, and protein will be broken down into amino acids, which will first be used to replace body proteins, but most people consume too much protein in this country, and so they'll in general be stored as body fat, and then the nitrogen will be lost in your urine, which could possibly tax your kidneys. Now, when you're fasting, you draw on your energy stores. So this is when you draw on the glycogen stores in your liver and muscle to produce glucose and then energy. Your body fat stores will be rendered into fatty acids, which will then also be used for energy. Now, if you continue fasting and you completely deplete your glycogen, which is your body's sugar source, you will start to break down body proteins into amino acids to make glucose, and also ketone bodies and fatty acids, which can be used to make energy. And your body fat will also get broken down into fatty acids and then ketone bodies, which can be used for energy. But because you're fasting, you're not providing any glucose to the body, so things can't happen as efficiently. These fatty acids will break down into ketone bodies more readily because there is a lack of ATP being generated by glucose. Now, if you are a woman and you have less than 17% body fat, you are considered to be underweight. Now, that might seem like a somewhat high number, but it is in fact what the science says. Now, men, you can have down to 3% body fat and still be considered healthy. Now, the fat that is good for you, or rather the healthy type of fat, metabolically active fat, is called brown fat. This has a lot of mitochondria in it. It's usually found insulating your organs, but it can also be found in your other adipose tissue if you exercise a lot. If you consume less than 1,200 calories per day, your body will begin to actively lower your metabolism and go into starvation mode, which means that it holds on to fat rather than using it. And another interesting statistic is that 24% of calories in the American diet come from snack foods, which are high in salt, fat, and sugar. This combination of this type of food is very bad for you in terms of providing you the exact wrong type of calories, especially if you're overeating. If you are going to snack, you're better off snacking on complex carbohydrates that don't have fat in them. A Harris poll in 1995 showed that 71% of Americans over the age of 25 are overweight. And all you have to really do is look around to see that that's true. As of 2001, there were 6 million children in the United States that were considered seriously overweight. Yet, many people have borderline nutrient deficiencies or altered digestion which causes food sensitivities, constipation, or diarrhea. And this also causes or is possibly resultant from the fact that the microbiome of most American children is not balanced. So we tend to ignore the essentiality of maintaining gut health in our diets, which would also require us to consume more fiber and less sugars and fats. In fact, if you look at a graph of obesity in the United States over the past 60 or 70 years, the level of people that are overweight and obese stayed relatively steady for a long time, starting in 1960. But then in about 1975, you start to see the significant uptick in obesity in both children and in general in adults. Now, I looked into this because I was interested. This year here corresponds roughly to the introduction to high fructose corn syrup into the food market. And we didn't really discuss this in class too much, but fructose is basically immediately converted to fat in your liver because most people overeat sugar and don't use all the glucose that they consume, and so they never get around to using the fructose. And so if you're just building adipose tissue from the sugar that you eat, it makes sense that you would become fatter and fatter. It's just interesting to see basically a direct correlation between the introduction of this significantly chemically altered sugar food. Because high fructose corn syrup is made by taking regular corn syrup and breaking all of the sucrose molecules down into glucose and fructose, and then filtering out the glucose by chemical means to leave behind mostly fructose. Here's another graph that shows it a little bit more clearly. It's basically right in the 70s when childhood and teen obesity started to skyrocket. And here's another graphic that shows the severity of obesity. These show percentages of the population who are considered obese by BMI measurements. Notice that in the Corn Belt, there is between 25 and 30% obesity rate. And in much of America, it's greater than 20%. There are only a few states that have even a moderate amount of obesity, but nobody has a low level of it. And obesity is a major health concern because it increases your risk for heart disease, cancer, stroke, chronic obstructive pulmonary disease, and diabetes. You notice here the percentage of deaths in the United States linked to one of these factors is incredibly high for obesity-linked conditions. And some people may have a genetic predisposition to gaining or losing weight, but that really only accounts for about 25% of the body fat in your body. Most of people who have high amounts of body fat do not have a genetic factor that affects it. And if you are obese, we refer to this as metabolic syndrome. It causes metabolic syndrome, which are a cluster of factors that increase your risk for heart disease, type 2 diabetes, and stroke. These are abdominal obesity, which is a waist circumference greater than 40 inches for men or 35 inches for women. Blood triglyceride levels greater than 150 milligrams per deciliter, which you might get measured during a blood test. You could also have measured HDL cholesterol and LDL cholesterol. If your HDL is less than 40 milligrams per deciliter, if you're a man, or 50 if you're a woman, then you are probably in danger of developing one of these conditions. Your blood pressure will be high, so greater than 130 over 85 millimeters of mercury. And then if your fasting blood glucose is higher than 100, you are also probably in danger and should alter your lifestyle. Now, if you do find yourself in this position, what do you do to ameliorate it? Because it might not be obvious, especially if you are in a socioeconomic condition which doesn't permit healthy eating. You might decide to go on a therapeutic diet under the recommendation of a doctor. This is something like a low sodium diet to reduce hypertension, or a low fat diet to help with heart disease. However, weight loss diets are generally quackery. So anybody can invent a weight loss diet. They are unregulated, unproven, and very often unsafe. These are things like the keto diet or the Atkins diet. So the big thing to remember is that if you decrease your calorie intake below 1200, you will have these results: a decreased basal metabolic rate, a decreased lean body mass. So instead of burning fat, you will burn body protein and use your proteins for sugar instead. It'll also make you preoccupied with food probably all of the time. If you are really extreme about it, it can lead to an eating disorder where you have a psychological aversion to food. They can be unsafe because low-carb diets generally result in muscle loss and possible organ damage. Many of these diets, especially these starvation diets, they're not regulated by the FDA, so nobody checks their effectiveness. And based on what we are about to learn, we will see a number of other reasons why these are bad. So the best weight loss diet is a high carbohydrate, moderate fat, and moderate protein diet. So the one that we've discussed the whole semester. So you need 20 to 30% of your calories from fat, 55 to 60% from carbohydrates, preferably complex carbohydrates rather than sugar, and then 15 to 20% from protein. These are things like Weight Watchers, Jenny Craig, the DASH diet, and the USDA food guide. These lead to gradual weight loss of 1 to 2 pounds per week, because any more than that is unhealthy. And they contain typical energy deficits of 500 to 1,000 calories per day. Now, the 1,000 calories per day would be appropriate if, say, you were 300 pounds and you wanted to lose 50 to 80 pounds to get down into what would be considered a healthy weight. Now, 500 would be if you're, say, 250 and you're trying to get down to 200 or something like that. Now, low-carb diets are generally accompanied by high fat and protein, which means that you get 55 to 65% of your total energy intake is fat and remaining energy from protein. This is things like the Dr. Atkins diet, the sugar busters, or the paleo diet. These cause ketosis, which decreases your blood glucose and insulin levels and reduces your appetite. However, it also has serious concerns about both long-term compliance and potential health risks and side effects. Two major ones that I can think of are kidney damage from the number of ketone bodies that you're generating, and also from breaking down proteins and releasing enormous amounts of ammonia. But also, when you burn body protein and leave behind fat, you get something called sarcopenic obesity, where your muscles are mostly fat and very little actual muscle. Now, there is another diet that might be recommended, especially if you have heart disease or are in danger of heart disease, and that's a low-fat or very low-fat diet. That's where you just decrease the amount of calories from fat that you're getting. This is something like the Dean Ornish program for reversing heart disease, or the New Pritkin program. These emphasize carbohydrates, complex carbohydrates and fiber, and they also emphasize regular physical activity. They typically lead to lower LDL cholesterol, triglyceride, and blood glucose levels, as well as lower insulin levels and lower blood pressure. Another point I want to make about diets and exercise are that some people might think that by taking a protein supplement that they're going to increase their muscle strength or help themselves gain muscle while exercising. But in general, these do not work that way. If you take amino acid supplements or anabolic steroids, or there's something called androstenedione and dione, these generally cause major health problems, increasing your blood cholesterol and causing mood disturbances, but don't gain you anything in regard to strength or muscle mass. Really, the only way to do that is by exercising. And really, to lose a pound of body fat, you have to decrease your energy balance by 3,500 calories, which is the number of calories in 1 pound of fat. Now, if you're on a diet that's telling you lose 10 pounds in a week, that's 35,000 calories that you have to somehow lose in 5 days, or 7 days, which is just not going to happen. Something that does work is something called alternate day fasting. So something that for obese people, if you have a regular day where you eat a reasonable amount based on a recommended calorie amount for you, alternating with a fast day where you take in a quarter of the normal amount of calories, but not 0 calories, this will be effective for weight loss and cardio protection in obese individuals, because you will basically continuously give yourself carbs, but then you let your body run out of energy and turn some of your body fat into triglycerides to then be used for energy in your body. But you don't fast for long enough to let ketosis set in or to have cortisol take over as the primary hormone in your body, which leads to retention of fat and starvation metabolism. Now, this study that I'm showing here shows not only that that's good for obese people, but also people at normal weight or overweight. So alternate day fasting is really just a good way to maintain your weight and your health overall. Now, sometimes you might need to lose body fat and gain muscle. So you could be a normal weight, but you might have a higher body fat percentage than is really healthy. And in this case, you would want to couple this type of diet with an exercise routine, which will effectively convert your body fat into muscle. Now, the American College of Sports Medicine has suggested that a sedentary person who increases their activity level by 1,000 calories of energy expenditure per week, this can decrease your risk of heart diseases and diabetes as well. If you increase your activity by 2,000 calories, you can dramatically affect your fitness level. So this is in conjunction with dieting, possibly reducing your calorie intake. If you many people who are overweight consume over 3,000 calories a day, large amounts of fat and saturated fat. So reducing that by 500 or 1,000, as well as doing a decent amount of exercise, you can burn off body fat without feeling hungry all the time. Now, sedentary lifestyle is incredibly unhealthy, as I've mentioned. Some people call it the new smoking, although smoking is terrible for you and probably much worse for you than sitting. Sitting can cause organ damage and heart disease because muscles burn less fat and blood flows more sluggishly during a long sit. This allows fatty acids to more easily clog the heart. Prolonged sitting is also linked to higher blood pressure and elevated cholesterol. And people with large amounts of sedentary time are more than twice as likely to have cardiovascular disease than people who have small amounts of sedentary time. When you're sitting, your pancreas generally produces insulin, which would normally carry glucose into your cells, but cells in idle muscles don't respond as readily to insulin. So the pancreas produces more and more insulin that cannot be used for glucose because your body doesn't need it. And this can lead to insulin resistance. This is the reason that many people, at least in white-collar jobs, have standing desks, where they can walk around their workspace and increase their metabolic activity while still getting their work done. You can also do things like having desk exercise equipment if you have money, or if you don't have money, there are standing exercises like leg flexes and stretches that you can do, hopefully, in order to keep yourself active. There are also some people whose jobs don't permit them to do that, but my recommendation would be that if your boss tells you you can't exercise during the day, you should tell him that he's wrong and insist that you be allowed to do what is the bare necessities to remain healthy, because no job should cause you to be unhealthy. If you can manage it, take an hour jog or even every other day. But if you can't do all of your physical activity at once. So an hour jog a day won't necessarily negate those risk factors, because what matters is the time spent sedentary. Your metabolism will still not stay high if you aren't moving around throughout the day. And then there's a good test to see how strong your body is. This is a test that's typically given to indicate how much danger you're in of developing these sedentary related conditions. You should be able to go from a standing position to sitting cross-legged to then standing again without using your arms. If you can't do this, you should work on your flexibility and muscle strength until you can. Another really good exercise to do that burns body fat and strengthens most of the muscles in your body is the plank, shown here, where you put your elbows on the floor and your toes, and you lift your entire body up until it is flat like a board. All right, so now we're going to get into more of the specifics of the way that your body uses energy. And I'm going to use this information to make a couple of arguments about the best way to nourish yourself in order to maximize the weight loss that you can achieve from exercise and diet. You remember we talked about adenosine triphosphate, or ATP, which is the energy-carrying molecule in the body. This must be generated continuously, because muscles generally only store enough for about 1 to 3 seconds of activity. And ATP comes from the breakdown of carbohydrates, fat, and protein. Now, if you have 1 to 3 seconds of ATP stored up in your muscles and you use it all, then you have to turn to other sources. Now, there's one source that we didn't talk about yet, and I'm not going to test you on it, but it is sort of important for the unification of this argument. Something called creatine phosphate, it's like ATP, but it just stores one phosphate attached to a few amino acids, and then it can give that phosphate up to a depleted ATP molecule or a DP molecule to make it ATP again. And this gets you through another 10 or so seconds, getting you through basically a short foot race or a sprint. Both ATP and creatine phosphate are what we use for very intense activity bursts. And then after that, we have to start breaking down carbohydrates to get more ATP. And this is a diagram that shows what I was talking about with the creatine phosphate. You have the creatine molecule and a phosphate attached to it. It gives the phosphate to an ADP molecule to make it ATP and leaves behind creatine. So once you've used those initial stores of energy, then glucose starts being broken down for ATP production. And you get most of the glucose for this in your muscles from glycolysis of glycogen or blood glucose. And if you remember, I said the glycogen stores are limited in your body. So you rapidly burn through them, and then the only place you get glucose is from your blood. There are two types of glucose metabolism. There's anaerobic metabolism, which is what happens outside your cells. This yields 2 ATP molecules. And then there's aerobic breakdown of glucose inside your mitochondria, which yields significantly more molecules of glucose, or of ATP, between 36 and 38. And it happens by this process, which we talked about during the cellular respiration lecture, and I'm not going to go deep into the details of this right now. But you got glucose. It can, as well as some amino acids, can go and make pyruvate or lactic acid, which produces a small amount of ATP. This can also be taken up by the Krebs cycle or TCA cycle in the mitochondria. This is where some of other amino acids as well as fatty acids go in order to produce these molecules required for this cycle to occur. And then through a bunch of complicated processes where hydrogen is added to water, we get a lot of ATP. Fats can also be metabolized to generate ATP. In general, this is what we use to fuel low-intensity exercise or long-duration exercises like marathons. And fats are an abundant source of energy even in lean people. So lean people still have body fat, and they still have fat in their blood, and it produces significantly more energy per gram than carbohydrates, but it is significantly slower in breaking down. So that causes it to be the primary energy source during rest, sitting, and standing, but also for endurance events. So this means that carbohydrates and fats can both be used as energy sources for ATP production. Carbohydrates mostly for high-intensity activity and fats mostly for low-intensity activity. Proteins are generally not the major fuel sources for exercise. So your body really doesn't want to break down amino acids for exercise because it produces waste products, which then cause you to need to urinate, which can disrupt your hydration. And here is a somewhat busy figure. It might be easier to view from your computer screens or if you download the lecture. But this just shows the energy usage based on the types of energy source that you have in your body. So for sprinting, 0 to 3 seconds, you're using 100% ATP or creatine phosphate. Once you get into things like 100-meter dash or like 10 to 12 second long exercise, you've started to deplete your ATP and creatine phosphate stores and starting to use carbohydrates anaerobically broken down to produce ATP. Now, if the physical activity extends longer than that, then you start breaking down more and more carbohydrates to make ATP. And this is for the first 5 minutes. You are breaking down muscle glycogen. You're breaking down sugar in your blood to get energy. Now, at a certain point, this process becomes stymied by the fact that you're running out of sugar in your muscles, and your body has to either make more of it or call on fat stores. So once you get into things like a 10K race, which I really can't imagine doing a 10K race in 30 or 40 minutes, but I guess some people are pretty badass. You start to burn more fat so that you can, it's the slow burn nutrient, while the major intense parts of your exercise are compensated for by carbohydrates. The same for like a marathon, except because it's an endurance event, you're going at a somewhat high intensity for a long period of time. You actually can cause damage to your tissues, or just run out of fat or carbohydrates present in your body and start using a little bit of protein or amino acids for energy. Now, something like a day-long hike, this is at a moderate to low intensity, which means that you're going to use much more fat than carbs. And here's a graph, because we love graphs, showing the percent contribution to energy from fat or carbohydrates based on the intensity of the activity. Here at rest, 60% of your energy is coming from fat and 40% is coming from carbohydrates. As you increase the intensity, the amount of fat that you're using goes down and the amount of carbs that you're using goes up. And here is another table with a bunch of information in it. But if you are engaging in vigorous exercise, or really exercise in general, your nutrient intakes are going to be required to increase in order to compensate. So you're probably going to need more energy in the form of calories, because that's what we need to support exercise plus the activities of daily living. And this is dependent on your body size and type, especially as well as the intensity and duration of activity. Many female athletes require between 1,800 and 3,500 calories a day. Many male athletes require between 2,500 and 7,500 calories a day. And a large portion of this needs to be in the form of carbohydrates, because without proper carbohydrates, you can't store glycogen in your muscles, which is the way that your body prepares itself for further physical exertion. It also is what leads to glucose being present in your blood. And high complex carbohydrates foods also provide, in general, vitamins and minerals, because they are present in their whole form or a slightly processed form that doesn't cause the vitamins and minerals to be leached out. And if you are an athlete, you might need between 6 and 10 grams of carbohydrate per kilogram of body weight per day. And you can calculate this out for yourself. If you're on the low end of physical activity, I would go with the 6 number, because as we discussed before, high intensity physical activity, that's like marathon runners and rock climbers and things like that. And of course, fat provides you energy, as well as fat-soluble vitamins and essential fatty acids, as well as supporting the production of hormones and transport of nutrients. But you really only need between 20 and 35% of your total energy intake to be from fat. Proteins help build and maintain muscle. They also provide building materials for glucose and can act as an energy source if you are doing super intense endurance exercise. It's also what helps us recover from exercise. You need to eat protein after you've exercised in order to rebuild your proteins that you've broken. Protein needs to be, for a non-athlete, about 10% of your total energy intake, but that number might go up if you are doing a lot of physical activity. And we talked about numbers for that. For athletes, you need between 1.2 and 1.5 kilograms per kilogram of body weight if you're an endurance athlete. You need between 1.3 and 1.8 grams per kilogram of body weight if you're a strength athlete. If you remember, a sedentary person needs about 0.8 grams of protein per kilogram of body weight. Water. In addition to maintaining temperature regulation, it also maintains blood volume and blood pressure and supports all cell functions. You should consume fluid before, during, and after exercise, and you should consume enough fluid to maintain your body weight. So there is no way that you are burning off pounds and pounds of body fat during your exercise. You are losing water, and if you don't replace it completely, then you will probably not lose very much weight. And you need to consume at least 8 cups of water daily to maintain your regular health and activity. Athletes, on the other hand, might need up to 10 liters of water every day, or more if they're exercising in a hot environment. B vitamins, we mentioned them several times in this class. They are critical for energy metabolism from all of the nutrients. You might need more than the recommended daily allowance if you're an athlete, specifically thiamine, riboflavin, and B6, because you are more likely to lose fluids that contain B vitamins. Calcium is essential for bone mass, but also nervous system function, muscle contraction, hormone function, and transport of nutrients. So you absolutely need to meet the daily requirement for calcium if you're an athlete. You need to meet it even if you're not an athlete, but it's especially important if you're an athlete. And then iron, the same. If you don't get enough iron, you can't transport oxygen in your blood to your cells to participate in cellular respiration. So you got to make sure that you get the recommended daily allotment of iron for your demographic. So we're going to go through these. Athletes and regular people need between 45 and 65% of their total energy to come from carbohydrates. And following exercise, you should consume carbs with protein, which will enhance muscle protein synthesis. The reason to consume carbs with protein is that your body will use the carbs both to store glycogen, especially if you do this within the first 4 to 6 hours of the recovery period. And this will free up the protein that you've consumed to help build muscle. The less complex the carbohydrates, the better. So things like whole grains, fruits, and vegetables, because they also give you fiber, vitamins, and minerals. Here is a graphic that demonstrates why this is important. This is a 3-day cycle of training and resting. So person A in the green line, they're a bicycler, so they do a 2-hour cycling activity at hour 0, and it takes 2 hours. Now, the way your body works is that after exercise, your muscles are still working overtime, and so you are continuing to consume glycogen for the first 2 hours or so. And then if you consume carbs, then your body will replenish that glycogen almost entirely. Then the next day, you come back, you deplete your glycogen again with another 2-hour cycling activity, and then you eat carbs, and it brings that number back up almost to where it was before. And you keep doing this, and you can see that even after 3 days of fairly intense training, your body has still plenty of carbs and stored energy ready to go for you to keep going. Now, somebody on a low-carb diet, on the other hand, they deplete their muscle glycogen. They don't carb load after their practice, and they build up less glycogen in their muscles, and they don't recover to their original amount at all. The next day they do this again, and then the third day they do it again, and now you are down into the range where another 2-hour cycling activity will use up all of the glycogen in your muscles and put you into anaerobic respiration on day 3. So day 3 is going to need to be a rest day or a low intensity day in order for your body to be able to recover. If you do this all week and then try to do a competition, you're going to be dragging by Saturday. So we call the process of eating carbs after exercise carbohydrate loading or glycogen loading. And you can take steps to alter your exercise duration and carbohydrate intake to maximize your muscle glycogen. However, this won't always improve your performance, and especially if you have intestinal sensitivities, eating a lot of carbs right after you exercise might lead to gastrointestinal distress or a bloated feeling. However, I think in my own experience, I have tried this when doing things like climbing high peaks, and it really makes a big difference for me. Now, if you want to try this, if you want to try this is obviously recommended for endurance athletes. However, you can apply similar principles in your own exercise life. So if you put yourself on a 1-week cycle, say on Monday, 6 days prior to, they're using a race or a competition in this context, but say that you want to hike mountains or you want to rock climb once a week. If you want to physically prepare yourself for that, you exercise at a high intensity at the beginning of the week for a long time, and you moderately carb load for the first 3 days, doing about 70% max effort. And then in the second half of the week, you do a lighter training session with significantly more carbohydrate intake. So the first half of the week, you basically get your body in the mode of using and storing a lot of carbohydrates in your muscle. And then right before you're about to do the intense physical activity, you exercise to keep your metabolism high, but then you eat a lot of carbs to make sure that you have as many glycogen molecules in your muscles as possible. And then you rest the day before. You're going to do whatever you do. And then on the day, you just eat a regular amount or a slightly smaller amount, and the amount of carbs that are stored in your body will be at a maximum, and then you'll be able to use those in order to maximize your performance. Now, this is obviously not so much useful for weight loss because most people are trying to burn fat and aren't going to overeat carbohydrates to do so, but these guidelines can actually be very helpful because it's much more important to get a larger amount of carbs when you're trying to increase your physical fitness, which, as we have discussed, is the best way to get yourself healthy and lose body fat. So training also affects your fat metabolism. So when you're metabolically active, this increases the number and activity of enzymes that are in your adipose tissue that metabolize your fat. This also improves the ability of your muscles to store fat, which is another way that they can get instant energy. It also improves your ability to extract fat from the blood for your use during exercise, and generally spares carbohydrates for prolonged intense training or competition. So the more you exercise, the more predisposed your body will be to metabolize fat instead of sugar immediately. Now, when you're training, your protein needs go up, especially if you're a competitive endurance or a resistance athlete. But even if you go to the gym several times a week, your protein needs will be higher. However, if you're not an athlete, you probably aren't consuming, and you're probably consuming plenty of protein. There aren't that many people in the United States that have protein deficits. However, it does occur, especially among people who have food insecurity or eating disorders. Now, I'm going to mention this again, that high protein, low carb diets have no support in being good for athletes or anybody. And if you're going to consume protein, you need high quality protein sources such as poultry, fish, eggs, low fat, dairy foods, legumes, or soy products. Now, you can consume more than enough protein if you just follow the USDA guidelines. They used to be called the Food Pyramid. Now it's called My Plate. You can find it on USDA.gov. And you should not need to supplement protein at all in this case. So protein shakes, amino acid supplements are totally unnecessary. Water is of paramount importance. So this lubricates your tissues and cells. It transports nutrients, hormones, and waste products. It's a component of many metabolic reactions. It's part of body tissues such as proteins and glycogen. And it's important for temperature regulation because the evaporation of sweat off of your skin cools your skin. If you become dehydrated while exercising, you can develop a heat-related illness like heat syncope, which is when you get dizzy, or heat cramps, which is where you develop muscle spasms. And the most severe example is heat exhaustion or heat stroke. These are on a continuum, but they have symptoms including excessive sweating, weakness, nausea, dizziness, headache, difficulty concentrating, and they can be very serious. So you can die from heat exhaustion. There are some symptoms of dehydration during heavy exercise. So the first one is obvious, decreased exercise performance. Also, the increased level in perceived exertion, so you feel like you're working harder than you actually are. Your urine will become dark yellow or brown. Your heart rate will be higher than it should be. It can decrease your appetite. It can decrease your ability to concentrate. It can decrease your urine output. And then I mentioned fatigue, weakness, headache, and dizziness. If you look at this picture, you can sort of see who's dehydrated just based on the looks on everybody's faces. I would actually argue that every single person in this picture is dehydrated except for this guy right in the center who's looking like he's having a great time. He's not. He's just got a steady look on his face. He's looking straight ahead. All the rest of these guys are just like huffing and puffing. This guy's having a real bad time. He looks like he's about to drop. And you should work to maintain your body weight in fluids. So if you are doing something that lasts less than an hour, you should just drink water. You probably aren't depleting your body of electrolytes in that amount of time. However, if you are doing something that takes longer than an hour, you should start thinking about consuming a sport drink that contains carbohydrates and electrolytes. You should be drinking before, during, and after the exercise. There's some number of urban legends about drinking water, but the idea that you're going to give yourself a muscle cramp by drinking water, you get a muscle cramp from being dehydrated. And then you chug water, and your body is trying to put all that water into your body as fast as possible, which might make you think that the water caused a muscle spasm, but it's just not true. You can't rely on your thirst mechanism to tell you when to drink water either, because if you're exerting yourself physically, you're probably not really paying too much attention to how thirsty you are. Another thing you should do is limit your drinks containing fructose, because fructose doesn't get converted to glucose immediately in your liver. It gets stored as fat, so it's not going to give you the carbohydrate boost that you think it's going to. Other things you should avoid are caffeine, alcohol, and carbonated beverages for a number of reasons. Alcohol dehydrates you. Caffeine gives you an artificial energy boost that isn't correlated with any actual metabolic process. And carbonated beverages bloat you and acidify your blood, which both can cause issues. And here's a guide for fluid replacement. If you're a sedentary person in a cool environment, you probably need 2 to 3 liters a day. If you're active in a cool environment, you might need 3 to 6 liters per day. And those numbers go up in warm environments. This series of blurbs gives you more specific amounts of ounces per pound or kilogram of body weight for various activities. I'm not going to read through all of them, but in general, you want to consume about 3 cups of fluid for each pound of body weight that you lose during exercise or competition. And that is a hard and fast rule. You should be consuming enough fluid to permit regular urination and ensure a light color of your urine. In general, about 125 to 150% of fluid loss is usually sufficient to ensure complete rehydration. Vitamins and minerals. I mentioned B vitamins, calcium, and iron. Calcium is of especially more important, as well as iron, for female athletes. There's something called the female athlete triad, which is unfortunately something observed fairly often, where women are more prone to calcium deficiency, as well as being more prone to negative body image that leads them to underconsume calories, which puts them in danger of developing eating disorders and osteoporosis. But most of your needs can be met with a healthy diet and don't necessarily require supplementation. Now, how much physical activity is enough to maintain a healthy lifestyle? I mentioned before that inactivity should be avoided at all costs. So even if you have a job that causes you to be sitting all day, you should make an effort to get up and even say use the bathroom or take the stairs to the next floor to use the bathroom, to eat up 10 minutes of your time. And any boss that tells you that you can't use 10 minutes to make sure you don't die young is not a good person. So for substantial health benefits, you should do a minimum of 150 minutes a week of moderate intensity exercise, or 75 minutes of vigorous intensity exercise, or a combination. Now that amounts to roughly 20 minutes a day, 25 minutes a day, 30 minutes a day if you're feeling feisty. And if you increase that to 300 minutes a week of aerobic activity or 150 minutes of intense activity, that will probably result in you becoming fairly physically fit. And among these activities should be some muscle strengthening activities, because building muscle is a good way to improve your metabolism, but it's also a good way to ensure healthy bone structure. So here's a nice graphic that shows how you might want to break these exercises up. So 30 minutes a day, most days a week, of cardiorespiratory fitness at 50 to 70% of maximal heart rate. If you're going hard, 70 to 85% of maximal heart rate. And you want to do these for 30 consecutive minutes. Things like swimming, walking, running, cycling, dancing, or other aerobic activities are perfectly sufficient for doing this. You also want to do 2 to 3 days a week of muscular fitness, where you lift 70 to 85% of your maximum weight. And you can do this in sets, say 1 to 3 sets of 8 to 12 lifts each, and doing a minimum of 8 to 10 different exercises that involve all of your major muscle groups, such as arms, shoulders, back, abdomen, hips, chest, and legs. And then 2 to 4 days a week, you should engage in flexibility exercises where you stretch through the full range of motion. And you say you want to do each stretch 2 to 4 times, holding them for 15 to 30 seconds. You can also do yoga or Tai Chi in order to get this stretching, and sometimes this also increases your muscular fitness and cardiorespiratory health, especially intense yoga. And here's a graph in case you don't know how to figure out what your maximum heart rate is. It's 220 minus your age. So a 20-year-old has a maximum heart rate of 200 BPMs, and 70% of your maximal heart rate is 180. This number goes down as you age, to the point where if you're middle-aged, you might be hanging out in the 140 range and be feeling pretty taxed. And when you exercise, you want to give your body a chance to get ready for the exercise, as well as a chance to relax itself while still engaging in physical activity. So you do warm-ups and cool-downs. A warm-up, or also called preliminary exercise, is a brief, gradual, and gentle activity that prepares your muscles by increasing blood flow and temperature. It also helps increase your flexibility and can help you prepare psychologically for the more intense workout. Now, the cool down period is done afterward, and it should also be gradual and slow and include the exercises that you were doing in your session, but at a lower intensity. So if you were doing weightlifting, you might want to do a cool down period where you just move your arms in the direction that you were lifting weights, or take the lightest weight that you have and do a set of reps. You should also be stretching during this cool down period to help yourself prevent injuries. This can also reduce muscle soreness because you clear out things like lactic acid, which are produced as a byproduct of metabolism and can cause soreness after the fact. Now, there are a number of ways to increase your physical activity that don't involve necessarily taking time out of your day to do so, or not taking that much time. So you can just generally walking as much as you can, or taking the stairs at every opportunity. And if you work at a computer, take breaks to stand up, stretch, walk, or refresh yourself. You should absolutely be able to do this during the day with no problem. If you watch TV, you should exercise while watching the TV. You can do things like put an exercise bike in front of your television, or there are a number of small home-sized exercise equipment that you can obtain. Moving around for your everyday activities, like checking your phone. So say you get up every morning and you check Instagram for a half an hour. Instead of sitting at your kitchen table or in your bed, you could jog in place or stretch while you're checking Instagram. And then dancing is always a good one. So throw on your most boppin' tunes and flail around like a crazy person in your bathroom while you're getting ready. Now, here is a nice little graph that shows the energy cost in calories per body weight kilogram per minute for various activities. This will be useful for you when you do your diet analysis project, because I'm asking you to calculate the calorie cost of your physical activities. So, sitting and studying is a light intensity activity. It burns 0.022 calories per kilogram of body weight per minute. Now, on the other end of the spectrum, running at a 7-minute mile is a vigorous activity that burns 0.205 calories per kilogram, which is a little bit less than 10 times as many calories. And obviously there's a spectrum of these in between, and there are more complete lists that you can find on the internet that will give you the same information for a bunch of different activities. However, you can probably figure out a number for your own physical activity based on this list. And just to go back over the benefits of exercising, it reduces the risks of heart disease, strengthens your heart, reduces risks of high blood pressure, increases lung efficiency and capacity, which is of large concern in the age of cardiovascular disease. Reduces the risk of type 2 diabetes, reduces risk of colon cancer, strengthens your immune system, strengthens your bones, reduces risk of bone, muscle, and joint injuries, promotes healthful body composition and weight management, and benefits your psychological health and stress management. Now, there's also the other side of this. There are many people who are not overweight who feel like they are overweight, or that they have to eat small amounts of food to maintain a specific body image. And this leads to what we call a disordered eating. And the picture that's shown here is a high school or college level female athlete who you can see from the thinness of her legs and arms that she is undernourished, and this in general leads to difficulties when trying to engage in athletic activities. I mentioned before something called the athletic triad. So restrictive dieting, which basically just means inadequate energy and nutrient intake, as well as over-exercising and weight loss and lack of body fat, can combine with or cause amenorrhea, which is the cessation of the menstrual cycle. This can lead to diminished hormones and loss of calcium from your bones. The eating disorder can also lead to osteoporosis. And there are a number of risk factors that might contribute to the development of an eating disorder. There are psychological factors such as low self-esteem, feelings of inadequacy or lack of control, as well as plain old depression, anxiety, anger, or loneliness. There are other interpersonal factors like troubled home life, difficulty expressing emotions and feelings, history of abuse, or be it ridicule by peers or weight-based ridicule, but also physical or sexual abuse. There are social factors like cultural pressures to be thin and idealization of thinness. There are also very narrow definitions of beauty that rigorously define what is considered attractive in men and women, and this leads to cultural norms that value people based on physical appearance rather than inner qualities and strengths. There are also genetic and biological factors such as chemical imbalances that control hunger, appetite, and digestion, as well as a possible gene or set of genes that predisposes an individual to either be over or underweight, but these factors are still under investigation and are fairly inconclusive. Now, the main eating disorder that is encountered is anorexia nervosa. This is somebody who severely undereats to the point of starvation. There are many, many signs of anorexia nervosa that you could look for, such as difficulty eating with others or lying about eating, frequently weighing themselves or measuring food portions, measuring energy intake or fat grams, development of food rituals like eating foods in specific order, excessive chewing or rearranging of food on the plate, refusal to eat certain foods like carbohydrates, fats, or foods of a particular color, avoidance of meal times, avoidance of situations involving food, excessive exercise, frequent comments revealing their disgust with their body size or shape, distortion of body size, so somebody who thinks they're fat even when other people are trying to tell them they're too thin, and people who deny that they're hungry even when they are. There can be emotional and mental signs like depression and social isolation, needing to be in control or being inflexible, decreased sex drive or fear of sex, low self-worth, again, difficulty expressing feelings, which would lead them to be afraid to discuss their food and body issues with others, perfectionism. If you can have difficulty thinking clearly or concentrating due to malnutrition, general irritability or denial, as well as accusations that people are overreacting to their low weight. Anorexia can cause insomnia. And then there are the physical signs where you have 15%, you're 15% below the expected body weight for your age, height, and activity level. You generally have a lack of energy and fatigue or muscle weakness because you're not taking in enough energy. Decreased balance and unsteady gait because you're losing muscle tissue and bone density. Your body temperature can go down because you aren't providing enough energy to keep yourself warm. Your pulse can become irregular, and your maintenance of blood electrolytes and lean and fat tissue can decrease. Tingling in the hands and feet due to poor circulation, as well as thinning of the hair or hair loss. People with downy hair, like very soft hair, this is the result of poor nutrition as well. And here are some more physical signs. So thin, dry, brittle hair, dry, easily bruised skin, brittle nails. It can alter your levels of serotonin and neurotransmitters. It can alter your glucose metabolism, lead to mood changes. It can mess with your thyroid gland. It can cause anemia. It can compromise your immune system, lower your blood pressure. You can actually suddenly die because of a ventricle arrhythmia, which is where your heart beat. You skip a beat. You can get dehydrated, which can mess with your kidneys and alter your electrolytes in life-threatening ways, causing chronic renal failure. You can get abdominal pain and bloating, which is caused by slowed by caused by slowed gastric emptying. Your gut holds on to food as long as possible in order to suck as many nutrients out as it can. You can get pancreatitis or constipation from being anorexic. It can also disrupt your reproductive function by disrupting sex hormone production, disrupting your menstrual cycle, and causing infertility. You can get decreased bone mineral density and decreased ability to absorb calcium, as well as decreased intake of bone-building nutrients and loss of bone due to elevated cortisol. And then again, you lose muscle tissue because you literally digest your body proteins. And if you have an eating disorder, then you might need to see a psychotherapist in order to help not have an eating disorder anymore. There are a number of levels to this. There's outpatient care where you are underweight, but you're greater than 85% of what you should have. You're not suicidal, but and you might be cooperative and motivated to recover, but you're medically stable and self-sufficient, and you are capable of exercising. You might experience compulsive exercise. You might experience the need for structured settings. But in general, you can get the support you need from others in order to undergo treatment in an unsupervised capacity. There is another level called intensive outpatient, where you are under 85% but greater than 80% of your healthy body weight. You're still not suicidal, and you're cooperative and medically stable, but you might not be able to control your compulsive need to exercise or compulsive desire to purge. These both occur when you're near the treatment center that you're trying to attend. If you get much lower, you might need to go into partial hospitalization. So if you have 75% of the healthy body weight, you start to be in a situation where you're considered a danger to yourself, and also you might be classified as uncooperative in your ability to undergo the treatment. And you need structure in order to gain weight. You need structure in order to prevent compulsive exercise. And this might be a result of a limited support structure. Partial hospitalization is still only necessary. It's helpful if you live near the treatment center, because if you're only partially hospitalized, then you're traveling back and forth from home and the hospital. And in the case where that is not convenient, you might need to do something like a residential treatment center. So your body weight isn't necessarily as low as somebody who's in level 3, but you might be medically, suicidal. You might not be cooperating with treatment. You might need to be supervised at all meals, or you will just instinctively restrict your eating. You might even purge, and this causes you to be unable to gain weight on your own. You're still medically stable in the sense that you don't require intravenous fluids or tube feedings or multiple day laboratory tests, but you might live too far from the treatment center or have severe family conflict problems or absence of family, which means that you don't really have a support structure. And then the last level, the most severe, is called inpatient hospitalization. This is when your weight is severely low and you are medically unstable, which could lead to the requirement of being tube fed. You might be suicidal, or either passively suicidal or intentionally suicidal. And you might be incredibly uncooperative in the sense that you have experienced an intervention where some people expressed concern and you told them to take a hike, and they might take steps to make sure that you get admitted to the hospital so that you can get the supervision that you need in order to gain weight in a healthy manner and lead you away from the path of purging. People in this condition usually live far from their treatment centers and have severe family conflict, either the absence of family or severe abuse. And if you know somebody that's in one of these positions, you shouldn't try to help them yourself because it's really the job for a psychotherapist. However, if somebody like this is in your life and they're at levels 1 or 2, then you should absolutely act as a resource and a support structure if you find that that's within your capacity. Because people that have eating disorders at the end of the day really just need someone to help them because they have things going on in their life that are causing them to be under a great deal of stress. Now, I talked a lot about anorexia, but there are other eating disorders. Another common one is bulimia nervosa. It's very similar to anorexia, except that it's characterized by binge eating episodes and then purging, which involves either taking laxatives to have diarrhea or forcibly vomiting. And this is people who might feel totally out of control while eating, and then they purge or diet or fast or undergo vigorous exercise to compensate for their binge eating to prevent weight gain. Now, these people tend to binge on high-calorie foods and eat in secret, and then they vomit, which might lead them to be a normal weight, but generally they are still overweight as a result because all the reasons we talked about. Not eating enough calories will depress your metabolic function. And they might also experience wide fluctuations in weight because they're constantly binging and then purge dieting. Almost always leads to depression. It can be the result of or lead to substance abuse, specifically alcohol, cocaine, diet pills, amphetamines, and sedatives. These are all substances that affect your metabolism in a big way. Another thing you can get from bulimia is tooth erosion because the frequent vomiting puts hydrochloric acid into your mouth, which can dissolve the calcium in your teeth. There's another thing called binge eating disorder, which is like bulimia, but without the purging. This is somebody who might have a normal diet most of the time, but then every once in a while, they rapidly consume thousands of calories. And if you do this more than a few times a week, then this would be classified as a binge eating disorder. Usually you do this alone, and it's characterized by a lack of control or an inability to stop eating. People that do this often experience post-binge eating feelings of self-hatred, guilt, and depression or disgust. And these people may also engage in purging and fasting or excessive exercise, but they also might not compensate for their high-calorie intakes or not. And then there's another newer eating disorder called muscle dysphoria or dysmorphia. This is often found in men where the person is preoccupied with the shape or level of muscularity in their body. These people exhibit all of the characteristics of an eating disorder, like frequent weighing, constantly checking appearance, criticizing their own body weight or their size, and wearing baggy clothes to hide themselves. This is a person who might engage in excessive exercise and a preoccupation with food, follow strict dietary regimens, have a low-fat and high-protein diet, but they also might abuse steroids or dietary supplements specifically for the purposes of increasing their musculature and decreasing their fat. And this could lead them to have horrible things for you, like ephedrine or androstenedione, which are stimulants that can cause a lot of harm. And this behavior is considered a disorder when the individual continues despite having knowledge of the adverse physical and psychological consequences. So it's like an addiction in that sense. Now, you could spend a lot of time speculating about the reasons that we have such incidences of eating disorders in this country, but a good place to start is the cultural body image that we have for athletes. So an interesting statistic is that the average size of female gymnasts in the U.S. Olympic team shrank from 5'3" and 105 pounds in 1976 to 4'9" and 88 pounds in 1992. That is a very small person, and it's far out of the average range for people. So you go on television, you see a combination of very artificially slim people that have been hand selected to participate in these international sporting events, but then you also see lots of skinny, beautiful people on TV drinking beer and having cheeseburgers all the time. And that kind of behavior just doesn't correlate with being healthy. So it creates cognitive dissonance where you feel like you should be able to live that lifestyle and also be healthy, when in reality the people that look like that are A, probably unhealthy, and B, probably not eating the way that they are portrayed as eating. Now, if you're overweight, it might seem like you should just be able to take some weight loss drugs to help you lose that body fat. And there are a number of drugs that are in fact marketed to help you lose weight. Things like sibutramine, also known as Meridia. This works like Prozac, which basically prevents the brain cells from taking up important neurotransmitters. And then these neurotransmitters accumulate in the appetite controlled center and makes you feel like you've eaten enough. Now, a drug like this can help you lose weight and keep it off, but only as long as you keep taking the drug. So now you have a lifelong commitment to taking something that probably has a large number of harmful side effects. And weight loss drugs have a history of health problems and failures. Starting in the 50s and 60s, people would take literal amphetamines to suppress their appetite and boost their metabolism. Now, as you probably already know, amphetamines are addictive and cause paranoia. Most famously, John F. Kennedy was on amphetamines, and he would stay up until 2 or 3 in the morning just being manic. Then in the 1990s, there was a couple of drugs, fenfluramine and phentermine, and dexfenfluramine, which were linked to heart valve disease. So that's a nice trade-off there. Phentermine is still available. It suppresses your appetite by increasing levels of the neurotransmitter norepinephrine. And side effects include nervousness, restlessness, and diarrhea, and shouldn't be prescribed for more than 3 months at a time. There are other drugs, orlistat, which has a brand name Xenocol. It takes a different approach by blocking fat digestion, which blocks your lipase enzymes. There are a number of drugs that are prescribed for short-term use, less than 3 months, like Adipex, Fastin, Ionamin, a whole bunch of lists of other hard-to-say names. Most of them are amphetamine-like and suppress your appetite. And the weight loss that you experience with these drugs is about 0.5 pound per week at first, and then it slows to little or nothing because you develop a tolerance. But then you also develop nervousness, insomnia, rapid heartbeat, and high blood pressure. So really, you're just better off trying to exercise a little bit more. Now, there's another thing that people do. It's falling out of favor these days because, it's interestingly enough, people are actually too overweight to get bariatric surgery. But bariatric surgery is where you detach your esophagus from your stomach and reattach it to the small intestine, which creates a tiny stomach pouch. some surgeons attach a ring to your mini stomach, which slows the flow of food and makes the person feel instantly full after eating very little food. Now, when you have a surgery like this, it's about there's a statistic that about 3 of every 200 patients die during surgery from infections or leaking sutures, and 8% develop very serious but non-fatal complications such as vomiting and ulcers. And some people actually miss being able to eat food and ask for the surgery to be reversed, which may or may not be possible depending on the specifics. And just to show you the level of extremity that we're talking about here, the normal stomach looks like this. We talked about this during our digestion lecture. If you get something called a vertical banded gastroplasty, they create a little stomach pouch with staples, and then they put a little band around, and this restricts the flow of food into your stomach and makes you feel full much faster. Now, there's another thing called gastric bypass, where you completely separate part of the stomach and attach it to the small intestine. Now, you also still have to get enzymes from the pancreas, which all come into the upper part of the small intestine. So you reattach that part of the intestine to your to this area, and this allows the enzymes from your pancreas to get in and digest your food. Then there's a slightly less severe version called gastric banding, where they just put a band around the stomach to create a small pouch and a large pouch. And this restricts the amount of food that you can consume at once and makes you feel full faster. Here's an up close of these processes. So we use surgical staples and a surgically reinforced outlet. This is vertically banded gastroplasty. The surgeon has the gastric pouch, and then most of the stomach is unused. Then in the gastric bypass, here they use surgical staples to section off most of the stomach, reattach the intestine here, and most of the upper intestine is unused except for the presence of the enzymes. And then this is the gastric bypass again. You have a 2-ounce pouch here. You've attached the small intestine up to the top. And this is the bypassed small intestine here. Now, if those all seem incredibly extreme and disgusting and painful, that's because they are. And really, all you have to do is reduce your portion sizes a little bit, and you can avoid morbid obesity. So that's the difference between having a 3-inch and a 6-inch bagel. You can see the calorie differences. A 3-inch bagel has 140 calories. A 6-inch bagel has 350 calories. You know, a small hamburger has 333 calories. A large hamburger has 600. Small French fries has 210 calories. A large French fry has 610 calories. And 6.5 ounces of soda has 85 calories, but a 20-ounce bottle has 250. I know that everybody wants to have their cake and eat it too, but in general, if you just think a little bit about what you eat and exercise, then you can have an energy balance in your life and not have to worry about any of these health conditions. So that's the end of the lecture. Before I end, I'm going to quickly discuss the final diet project that I've posted on Google Classroom. So I've provided it for you in Google Docs format on the website, but the version on my computer is Microsoft Word, so here we are. So you have to document the food that you or somebody you live with eats for a whole day, and also document their physical activity, indicating type, intensity, and duration of the exercise. You want to be specific. You want to either measure it out in cups and use the serving size that is listed on the packaging, or weigh it out using a kitchen scale and look up the nutritional content on Wikipedia. And in fact, some of the nutrients that I'm asking you to list on here, you're not going to be able to find on a food label, and you're going to have to make some kind of estimate. Don't include any supplements you take, but do include the fluids. Now, you're going to want vital information for yourself or for the person that you're analyzing. That includes your weight, height, age, activity level, and any health indications or medications or eating limitations that you have. And when you're trying to figure out the nutritional content of a food, I've found that Wikipedia generally has pretty good articles about the nutritional content of whole foods, such as fruits and vegetables, which is where you're going to get the bulk of your vitamins and minerals anyway. So, for instance, the Wikipedia article on apples, if you scroll down on the Wikipedia article for apples, you eventually come to a nutrition facts label. This one's kind of far down, but here, apples with skin, the edible parts of the apple, this gives the nutritional value per 100 grams. So this is where weighing things out on a kitchen scale could be useful, but also you might be able to find food packaging that gives you a gram to cups or gram to ounces conversion. These ounces here are weight ounces, so it doesn't really work the same way that cups do, but a bag of spinach or a bag of apples might give you, say, 1 cup of chopped, and then give you the gram quantity for that as well. You can see here, if you were to look at a nutrition facts label for an apple, it would have calories, carbohydrates, sugar, and fiber. It would have fat and protein, but then it would only have a few vitamins and minerals. Whereas here, it gives you basically every mineral that I've asked you for in the diet project, and some that you wouldn't expect to be in there, like potassium being in apples. Here's another one that I've pulled up for spinach. This one is a lot higher up in the article, so it's easy to find. It's again given per 100 grams, and this, you can see, has a lot more B vitamins and other vitamins and minerals. And you can guess that if you have spinach in your diet, for instance, that you're not going to have to consume very much of it to get a large amount of what you need for the day, while consuming very few calories. So that's that. I've given you an example here for calculating your needs of various nutrients. We talked about protein needs a lot in this class, and you can actually calculate your calorie needs from your protein needs by assuming, say, that you need 0.8 grams of protein per kilogram of body weight. If you're 150 pounds, that's 68 kilograms. This means you need about 54 grams of protein a day. And if you were to multiply this by 4 calories per gram, that's about 200 calories of protein. And if you're following the guideline of 10% of your calories being from protein, that means that you're on about a 2,000 calorie diet. It might be, this number is actually a little bit higher, but you get the idea. I think this person would actually need 2,100 calories for this amount of protein. And you can also use the estimated energy requirement that I talked about in the lecture just now. This uses your age, weight, and height, as well as your physical activity level in these equations. You plug and play for these equations to get a number that is hopefully between 1,500 and 3,000 calories. If you're not an athlete, it might be above 3,000 calories if you are an athlete. And if you're looking for more information on that, there's a link here for Canada's Institute of Medicine, which gives some of the theory behind this. But then the bulk of this project is going to be what I'm calling the diet analysis. So you will itemize all of the major nutrients, starting with calories consumed. You're going to indicate how much you should be getting, how much you did get, whether you're over or undernourished, and then discuss the health or lifestyle elements that will affect your caloric needs and the implications of your caloric consumption. And then you do this again for carbohydrates, itemizing dietary fiber and added sugars, fats, focusing specifically on saturated fats, trans fats, and essential fats, like omega-6 and omega-3s. Then protein, I'm not going to make you figure out all the different amino acids. It's a little bit beyond the level of this course. Water intake, and then intake of all of the essential vitamins and minerals. So vitamins A, all the B vitamins, C, D, and E, and then sodium, potassium, calcium, magnesium, iron, zinc, and copper. And I expect complete sentences, or complete thoughts at least, on the implications section. So this is an analysis project, so I want you to do some critical thinking. It's going to require critical thinking to even complete the project, which is why it's the final project in the first place. The other thing that I want you to do for the micronutrients is indicate a food that you should add or eliminate to help you achieve the proper amount of these vitamins and minerals. All right, and so that's the project. It's due by the end of the semester, which is December 18th, and it's worth 100 points. 20 of those points are going to be bonus. So 80, all you have to do is get an 80 to get full credit on this. If you get more than an 80, I'll give you extra credit on your class grade. So extra motivation to do a good job on this, especially if you've been struggling this semester. You can get 20 free points. Well, it's 20 out of 300, but still, that's almost 10% of your grade that you can get back. And sorry for posting this right before Thanksgiving, but this isn't due until the end of the semester, so everything should be fine. I hope everybody has a good holiday, and hopefully everybody's staying safe and comes back ready to go with the last 2 units.